Hello, 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 and welcome to the Pod Place, episode 3. So excited to be back. What a whirlwind this podcast has been, hey? And I really hope that everyone loved episode 2 and my interview with Mel. Just such an incredible person. And if you haven't checked out that episode, make sure you do, because it is definitely worth listening / watching. Just so much goodness in there and so many really important messages that we can be taking on and really reflecting upon on our own journeys. Because even though all our journeys are so unique and so different in their trajectories and the way that they are sort of happening, very, very unique to our child and our circumstances, there's still a lot that we can connect over. And I think listening to others' stories is such a easy but powerful way to make that connection and support our own journey. So yeah, definitely check that episode out. And today's is a little bit different. It is just me today. I wanted to talk about advocacy, the parent advocate role. One of my, passion areas that I love to talk about a lot, because I think there's so much in it. And for parents of deaf kids, a lot of the time, almost all the time, that little baby is the first deaf person you've ever met. And that's wild. A lot of you don't have or have never met a deaf person. You don't know or have knowledge around the deaf community, or deafness in general and what that means for your child. But all of a sudden, you've been given this information and you have to make all these decisions, and you have to make them now, and you have to know what is best for your child, and you need to know where they're heading in 10, 15 years, and you need to start making decisions that will impact their life for the rest of their life. And I think that's a lot, right? That is a lot, and it's not talked about enough. And there is so much pressure on families to make the right decision, and unfortunately the advice being dished out is not always balanced, and it's not always it's not informing parents in the best way. A lot of the time there are agendas, there is bias, and we put a lot of trust in the advice that we're given, particularly in those early stages where we've just had a baby and we're just navigating survival of having a baby. And if you've got multiple kids, that's even more so. You're trying to juggle everything, and this is just another layer. And even though I had a lot of knowledge already when I had my son Frank, it's still real. I felt that heavily. It still really impacted me. And there are definitely moments where I was sitting in the car after a meeting or a conversation with a specialist, and I was just in tears, just burst into tears, because I thought, did I make the right decision? That's not how that meeting should have gone. I should have said this. I should have done this. And that sort of leads me to what this episode is all about. And that is my advocacy journey. And I guess using that to support your advocacy journey. Because I am by nature a people pleaser. That's right. For as long as I can remember, that has been my default. I have run from confrontation. I have run from difficult conversations. I don't want to ruffle feathers. I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to make anyone upset. That's always I've always wanted to be liked. And I think that's something that a lot of us feel, is that we just want to be seen as someone that can get along with everyone, and, easygoing, down to earth. And that is innately who I am. But that doesn't serve my son and this advocacy journey that I'm on. And so that has been something that I've really had to work on, and is something that has really evolved over the last 3 years, particularly because I've had to get really comfortable with not being liked. Not that I go out of my way to not be liked, but I have had to become comfortable with it, because I think that is it comes hand in hand with the journey. Because not everyone's going to understand your advocacy or your philosophy or your reasoning behind the decisions you're making or the comments you're making or how hard you're coming in with your advocacy. you're going to get a lot of people thinking you're overreacting, you're too extreme, you're too much, that what you're asking for is unreasonable. People are going to expect you to be grateful for what they're giving to your deaf child, even if that is tiny, even if that is nothing compared to what they need, or is just an iota of what they are entitled to. Because they are doing it, we need to be grateful. That seems to be how it goes in a lot of circumstances. And unfortunately, that doesn't serve our kids. That doesn't set our kids up for success. And it can be really tricky to push back on that, particularly if you are someone who doesn't like to face those difficult conversations, which is me. And so I used to call myself a bit of a chameleon growing up, because I would adjust my personality to the person I was around to make them feel more comfortable. That was my go-to. And I have become much better at being okay with being me, because I think that's innately part of this whole journey, is we have to really be okay with who we are and what we're advocating for, and know in our hearts that we are doing what's best for our kid. Because there is a lot of gaslighting when it comes to this role, and having to push back on things that do need to change. And we can start to second guess ourselves. And did I ask for too much? Was I being too much? Does my child really need that? Oh, probably not. Or maybe I'll just ask for this. Or, oh no, they're doing heaps already. I really don't want to ask them to do anything else. That's not fair. But what we're doing is we're starting to make excuses. Well, I wouldn't really say that, but I guess we're talking down the needs and the rights of our child, because we don't want to ruffle feathers and we don't want to cause a scene. We don't want to be that squeaky wheel all the time. And so what I want to talk about today is really how I moved from that feeling of just wanting to, go with the flow and not rock the boat and just be, easygoing all the time and it's all good, no worries, to still being that person innately, but being able to channel this strength in my advocacy and really hone in on my goals and philosophy when it comes to advocating for my son, and really sinking and leaning into that and being okay with that. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. The first thing I wanted to talk about, and it's something I say a lot in advocacy, in this advocacy space, is that I see advocacy like a muscle that we need to strengthen and we need to build. So we think about a muscle, an actual muscle. If we're not working on it, if we're not strengthening, if we're not lifting weights, if we're not doing our strength training, whatever it is, that muscle doesn't grow. It doesn't get stronger. It doesn't, we're not building any more muscle, right? It just lays stagnant. That is what can happen in advocacy as well, if we are not slowly inching ourselves to strengthen those skills around advocacy. So if we're not putting ourselves in those situations that are a little bit uncomfortable, that do set off a bit of an internal reaction in us, but that are really critical for this journey. And so what I sort of suggest with that is that you really, really slowly inch into those scenarios that don't feel comfortable for you. You don't have to go all the way to the biggest, scariest conversation, but it might just be starting to assert yourself, potentially outside of the space with your child, in other areas of your life where maybe you wouldn't normally say something, but actually, no, today I'm going to say something because I have a right to. It could be as simple as, oh, they got your coffee order wrong. You can tell them that, because I was always that person. They gave me a flat white on soy. Cool, don't drink soy milk, but that's all right. I'm just going to drink it because I don't want to tell them. I don't want to be that person. That could be a really good place to start if that's you. Is just saying, oh, hey, sorry, I actually ordered a cappuccino. And that's where it goes. And then they get you your cappuccino. And that's a tick. That is you strengthening the advocacy muscle. It might not sound like it, but those little moments build up to be big moments. And that's us building that advocacy muscle. Okay. And then we move into those bigger meetings where we actually have to have a meeting and advocate for our child. And the first one is going to be scary as hell. All right. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, particularly for those who really struggle with this sort of stuff and putting themselves in discomfort around these conversations. There are people out there who are like, no, I love it. I'm good. I can go in there and just do what I need to do. And you guys are awesome. And I wish I could be like that. But for a lot of us, it's just not that natural. And so we have to inch out of our comfort zone. I would definitely discourage just going straight into the hardest, biggest conversation or meeting or, you know, stakeholder meeting where you have to really be pushing hard back on systems and pushing back on policy. Probably lead up to that, I would say. So it's all about building in increments, right? Having those conversations, speaking up a little bit more, actually voicing your opinion, even if it's different to the person sitting opposite you, because that's okay as well. And I think as long as we're doing it in a respective way and we're just a respectful way, I should say, a respectful way, and really just staying within that proactive mindset of it's okay to have a different opinion. It's okay to push back on something I don't agree with, because it all comes back to that little human that we are raising, and that comes back to their rights, their education, their access, their opportunities. And I think that that's a really important part of this. And that leads me into the 3 advocacy models that I really want to highlight today. And the ones that I have moved through all of these, right? And if most of you would have too, it means you're a human being. Well done, you did it. So as I move through these, I don't want you to think or feel guilty if you're sitting in one that isn't ideal, because this is all part of the journey. Okay. And we need to be really kind to ourselves, because I can say right now that I have been through all of these. And I have done all of these 100%. So I'm going to start with the first 2 that we see very commonly with new parents on the journey as we're moving through. And then the third and final one that I guess we're really striving for, and that I want everyone to start really thinking about that being the goal for advocacy, because evidence shows, but also just anecdotally from talking to so many people and just being in this advocacy space for so long, this third model is the one that gets the outcome you want. And that's what we're doing with advocacy. We're pushing a philosophy or an agenda that we need to support our child's entitlements, to ensure they get the access, the opportunity, everything they need. But we want to do it in a way that's going to be long-term, get us the outcome that we want. So in doing that, we need to be strategic, is the biggest thing I would say there. So let's start with the first one. And this one is one that I know so many of us have been stuck in, I would say, and 100% me for a very long time. And this actually is even before I had my son. This is sort of where I used to sit a lot of the time, because it was safe. And there's nothing wrong with safe. But that one is what we call the passive advocacy model. And the passive advocacy model is about witnessing scenarios happening that aren't right, that are unjust, that aren't supporting or putting the needs of the deaf child first, but not having the confidence or knowledge or strategies to actually do anything about it or to say anything about it. So this could be happening with you right now with your child. They might be in childcare, they might be in school, or in another scenario where their needs aren't being met at even a basic level, right? And because there isn't the confidence there maybe, or you're feeling discomfort in having the conversation isn't being had. And so what happens is your child keeps having that same scenario happen over and over, because it's just, you probably have talked it down. You've probably thought, no, it's not big enough for me to say anything. I don't want to be the squeaky wheel. I'm just going to leave it. And I might just go back in a couple of weeks and see how it's going. And then maybe I'll say something. And then a couple of weeks comes by, nothing's changed. Oh, look, I might just wait a few more weeks and then maybe I'll say something. And all of a sudden we're at the end of the year and nothing's happened, because we're sitting in that space of, oh, I'm really comfortable here. And if I say something that crosses that line of, now I feel like I'm being squeaky. Now I feel like I'm pushing back too hard. But what we have to remember is that this is your child's life, their education, their access. This is their world. The people who are making the decisions and saying no or showing resistance, they actually just go home and don't have to think about this. But this is your child's life. This is your world. You don't get to leave it. They don't get to leave it. And also, I know as a parent, all of us would do anything for our kids. We'd walk over hot coals for our kids. We would, suffer the most excruciating pain so our kids didn't have to feel pain. So having an uncomfortable conversation is totally doable. And we've just sort of got to get our mindset in the space where it's just a conversation. And you are just advocating for your child's human rights. And that's a really big thing. It is their right to have access to education. Okay. A few keyword signposters on the wall isn't access. And you have every right to question that, to request more, to push back. This is your permission to do that. And so that passive advocacy model, as you can probably understand, is not going to get you the outcome you want. It's not driving that philosophy, and it's not giving your child the access and opportunity that they are entitled to on the same basis as their hearing peers. So it doesn't benefit our kids. So that one's not great. But in saying that, I've been there. I'm sure a lot of you have been there. Don't feel guilt around it. Just acknowledge it. So if you're in that space at the moment, if you're sitting in that model at the moment, acknowledge it. Say it out loud. Yep, okay, I'm in here. Not great, not ideal. What am I going to do about it? That could be like little steps that you do to get yourself, again, that inching out of that comfort zone. It could start with the coffee conversation, for example. The next model I want to talk about is almost to the other extreme. And again, I have been here. And if you follow me on socials, Instagram, I am very passionate in my advocacy. And being a mother of a deaf child, there is a lot of emotion there. And sometimes my emotions get the better of me. I'm the first to admit it. And I try very hard to regulate that because it doesn't serve me well and doesn't serve anyone else well. But there are still moments where things frustrate me. Things piss me off because they shouldn't be happening. And that can be really hard to regulate when I'm watching my little boy navigate this world and things aren't accessible to him. But it doesn't help. Okay. And this model, the model I'm talking about, is reactive advocacy. Reactive advocacy, which is your knee-jerk reaction, right? Your emotionally charged advocacy, sometimes aggressive. I've been there. I'm saying that, speaking from experience. You don't have a plan, something happens, and you immediately respond back. You don't have a plan, you don't have evidence, you don't have notes, you don't have a strategy in place. You're literally just throwing things at it. You're just scrambling, just seeing red, and you're just going at it, right? And although in the moment it may feel good, does it get you the outcome you want for your child long term? Does it make change? The answer is no, it doesn't. And in fact, sometimes it can actually do the opposite, right? Sometimes we've just burnt a bridge that we really needed to stay intact for things to work. And so that bridge is now burned, and now we need to find another avenue, or, we've said something we've regretted, and now we've got to go back on that. And unfortunately, it tampers, or it breaks that relationship or that foundation that we were trying to build with the people we're advocating against. Right. So as much as it feels good, I would say if you are seeing red, go home and yell at the mirror, go home and yell in the car, and just like allow that to happen. So the reactive model, while it may feel good in the moment to get those emotions out, it's not strategic. And we have to be strategic in our advocacy. Because it's the only way things are going to work the way we want them to work. We need to have a plan. And I'm saying that as someone who rarely has a plan. That is just not how I operate. I'm very much fly by the seat of my pants, and I just do what feels good at the time, and I throw it out there and see what happens. But in regards to advocacy, I'm very strategic, and I plan ahead, and I make sure I know my stuff. And that leads me to our final model. And this model, just to reiterate, is the model we're aiming for. This is the model that we want to go in with, right? Things may change along the way, and there is going to need to have more difficult conversations that happen, but we always want to start positive. We always don't want to come in with assumptions. We don't want to come in with what we think is going to happen. That's not going to work. And I only say that because I've done that too. And it doesn't work. this is the best model for advocacy that I believe gets the results that we want for our deaf kids. So this final model is what I like to call the proactive and collaborative model. It sounds so nice. It sounds so positive because that is the purpose of it, to be positive. And it's about actually, so a scenario happens, or you have to go in for a meeting, or there is something that, you are preparing for. The first thing you want to do is just reflect on that, right? Write down some notes, reflect on the scenario at hand, what's working well, what's not working well, what your key points are going to be, things like that, what isn't where it needs to be and how you're going to get there. Anything where you can reflect on the scenario and start to formulate a bit of an idea of what you're advocating for. You want to really understand the direction in which you want to take that meeting or that conversation. Then you're going to prepare. And I always say knowledge is power when it comes to advocacy. The more knowledge we have, not just around deafness and language acquisition and deaf and hard of hearing development, all that sort of stuff, that is critical. But also knowledge is power in regards to policy and things like the Disability Discrimination Act in Australia. So, and whatever yours might be in your country, and all the other policies that are entwined with that in the education space, things that are actually policies and statements that are actually put in place to support your child, to ensure they have access, right? Those policies you need to know back to front. So the first thing is you're going to prepare and really understand that space and understand the policies and the rights and responsibilities, all of that stuff before you go into these meetings. You want to know your child's human rights. You want to know what they are entitled to, because then you can speak to that at a policy level, right? You can bring it back to that policy, bring it back to those documents, because I think a lot of the institutions and the systems that we are advocating against work in that way. That is how they work. So we need to have that knowledge too. It's all part of the strategy, right? So you first are going to reflect, one. Second, you're going to prepare and research and really accumulate that knowledge and become really confident in that knowledge. I'm talking print them out, highlight them, annotate, take notes, all that stuff. That's what I do. I need to really get a color coding system happening. And on top of that, having knowledge around deafness, language acquisition, language deprivation, and deaf and hard of development in general. Deaf and hard of hearing development in general is really important. Side note, all of that is in my boot camp. So if you have been thinking about joining boot camp, all of that is covered, particularly around this advocacy as well, is also covered in my Raising Bilinguals boot camp. So that is number two. Make sure you're prepared, get your knowledge sorted, feel really confident. And then you're going to actually start to build a script, right? So you want to build a script around the key points. You've taken those notes in the reflection phase. You're now going to start to really build scripts around that, okay? And almost plan ahead. Now, obviously, I said before, don't assume responses that are going to be said. Don't assume they're going to be resistant or defensive. But what you do want to prepare for is certain responses that are quite common or things that you think may happen. So, A, I'm going to say this. They're probably going to say this from what you know, from the information you know. So you can start to build scripts around those responses, tying in evidence, linking in information that you know. You don't have to keep it all in your head. I've gone into advocacy meetings with paper very, very thick, this thick, if you're watching YouTube, of evidence, of anecdotal stuff, of policies, of everything highlighted, so I can refer to it. It's not meant to all be in here. I mean, unless you're like a genius, like my son, you can't keep it all in here. You need to write it down. The other thing I would suggest doing, sounds weird, but works a treat, go to the mirror and actually practice those scripts, say them out loud, particularly if you are sitting in that passive model at the moment where you feel really uncomfortable, you're not really sure what to do. Actually stand in the mirror and practice it. Just do it. Or talk to a loved one, your husband, your wife, your friend, your neighbor, your mum, your dad, whatever. Literally just talk to them like they are the person that you're advocating against. So that's really important. But in all of this, we want to make sure that the scripts that we're building and the approach that we're taking is one that is proactive and is working towards a solution and an outcome that you want. And so you're coming in with solutions, right? We never want to go in just with the problem and then telling the person across the table that they need to fix it. That's never going to go down well. And that's where this collaborative part comes into it. I always say with your first, initial meeting with a new organization, institution, a school, childcare center, whatever, you want to go in with this collaborative approach. So how can we work together to support my child? How can I help you? And how can you help me? Let's work together. We have a shared goal here. This is the shared goal. And what are we going to do to support that? Okay. And then you're working through your list of things that you're on your agenda that you want to facilitate and you want to implement. Okay, so there might be a bit of troubleshooting, a bit of problem solving, but always coming back to I'm here to support as much as I can. Okay, because that unfortunately is part of this role too. We can't expect people to do everything. We actually do have to give a lot of the solutions as well and work towards them together. It's always collaborative because you know that little human best, you know what they need, and a lot of the time, these organizations need to be led by you, even if they don't want to be. And so that does bring me to that final point around this is the model we want. We want to be proactive. We want to be collaborative. We want to be prepared. We want to have strategy. We want to have agenda. We want to have an agenda when we go in. But we also want to make it very clear that the meeting is about your child and you are leading that meeting. And again, that can be in a proactive and a respectful way, but that is really important because what we find is that so often families go in and straight away the person across the table starts leading. They have the agenda, they're making the points, they're calling the shots. And that should never happen in a meeting about your child, ever, 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 ever. Okay? So that's really important. Again, that can all be done in a proactive and collaborative way. But if you are being proactive and if you're being collaborative and you're still getting kickback, you're still getting resistance, you're still getting a lot of no's, you're still getting told, we can't do that here, we don't know how to do that, we don't have the resources for that, we don't have the funding for that, then you need to start bringing in your strategy and your assertive script and bringing in the evidence, bringing in the policies that you've been highlighting, bringing in your child's rights, right? You don't want to have to use that, but that is why that is there. If for some reason the conversation starts to turn somewhere that's not proactive or not productive for your child and what they need. And that's why that policy is there. So obviously always going in really positive, and hopefully with that approach, we can start to get this collaborative approach happening. But if there is just straight up resistance and defensiveness, then we need to go back to policy and you need to go back to your child's rights and what they're actually entitled to. And that is where you need to stem that from, because sometimes that is where we need to go in order to get our child what they need. And it is unfortunate, but it is also the way of the world, and it is going to be a huge part of our world and eventually our child's world. So the more that we can show how we advocate for our child, the better they are going to be in regards to their own self-advocacy as they grow, because they're going to have a beautiful model in you. So those are those three models in a nutshell. I know I sometimes go off tangents. I tried to stay pretty structured, but for me, I was mostly in the passive phase. Now and again would go into reactive. Happened once or twice. But I have found that the proactive and collaborative approach and coming in with knowledge, coming in with a really strong stance and them understanding that you know your child and you know the policy and you're here to support and work with them, but it's all coming back to your child's rights and what they're entitled to. When we move through that model, the outcome we get is so much better, right? We've got this collaborative nature between you and the person opposite you. You're wanting to work together. You're wanting to work towards a shared goal. And so that is always going to be a better approach than blaming, shaming, reacting, or not doing anything at all. But it takes time to get there. And again, it always comes back to preparation and strategy. And so that is the the big thing I would say is just do as much prep as you possibly can, because then you can recycle a lot of that stuff for different meetings, and then you're going to build that advocacy muscle because you're going to get stronger in your scripts. You're going to have the knowledge now embedded that you don't have to be reading it all the time. You're going to, understand deafness and your child more and more every day, and you will start to become a stronger advocate. Because if we don't advocate for them, who will? No one is more invested in that little human than you. You're it. So, as scary as it is, and I feel you, as scary as it is to get into those meetings and to push back on other people's agendas and to be the squeaky wheel, sometimes it is needed to make change. Thank you so much, guys. Please follow, subscribe, share, all of the things so we can build momentum with the podcast. I just think there is so much goodness that is going to happen in this space for families all over the world. Yes, I've had a lot of downloads from the US and Europe and Australia, and it's been really exciting to see so many people tuning in. So very, very grateful for you for being here. Next episode 4. I can't believe we're already at episode 4. That's wild. I will be interviewing another parent that has a very unique journey as well, and sharing her story around her own advocacy and how she's built that advocacy muscle, because she really is incredible in her advocacy. And I think she's going to have some great nuggets of wisdom for you. So I cannot wait for you to tune into that one. Have a wonderful week, and I'll see you soon.